Easter is about the message of God's salvation for us, and how He's brought that about. And one of the crucial components of Easter is the reflection of the cross on Good Friday. And so today, as we commemorate Good Friday, we want to take a moment to pause and to reflect on the cross and what that means for us. In order to comprehend and fully appreciate the message of Easter, we've got to park for a moment at the cross and what the cross speaks. Good Friday and the cross is really about waiting. As Jesus is being crucified upon this cross, and the disciples are sitting there wondering and standing nearby wondering what's going to come of all this. They were expecting the Messiah to bring about salvation for them. And here they were watching Him be put to death in front of their eyes. The cross is the pivotal part of Christianity. It's the symbol of death. It's a symbol of Rome's power in the world and the penalty for what you would do if you go against Rome. And so how could this symbol of death become such a widespread symbol of hope and synonymous with the Christian faith? Well, it's because of what took place upon that cross. But in order to fully comprehend it, I want us to go back hundreds of years before Jesus is being crucified upon the cross. We go back to the nation of Egypt. The people of Israel are enslaved by the Egyptian people and have been slaves for 400 years and are crying out for salvation, crying out for deliverance. And God shows up through His servant Moses, and the message is that He's going to bring about deliverance for them. And on the night that they are about to be delivered, He enacts an ordinance for the people of Israel, a feast that they are supposed to reenact year after year as a form of remembrance of what was going to take place. It's called Passover. And so as they are celebrating this feast, expecting the Lord's deliverance to happen for them, what we see taking place in the nation of Egypt is that darkness came upon the land. Darkness being the 9th plague, and then the expectation that the 10th plague was going to be the death of the firstborn, of everybody who was not a part of Israel, and everybody who would not paint the doorposts with the blood of the lamb that was being provided for them. And so on the night of their deliverance, what we see is this commandment for them to prepare a meal of lamb and to take the blood of the lamb and to sprinkle it over the doorpost as a sign of covering, so that when the angel of death went throughout the land of Egypt, he would pass over the houses that had the lamb sprinkled. And in fact, we read in Exodus 12:11, "This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." Eat it in haste, because it's the Lord's Passover. And what we find interesting is they have to eat this meal quickly, hurriedly, because God is going to bring about an instant and sudden deliverance. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. That night, the angel of death goes throughout the land, and the firstborn of every household is put to death, even of the livestock, who did not have the blood sprinkled over the doorposts. And Israel's deliverance happens in a day. One night, it's done. They're driven out and they are free. But what we see happen after that is 47 days it takes Egypt to travel to Mount Sinai. It's a 700-kilometer journey. It's quite a ways to walk by foot with 1 million people of this nation traveling. They get to the mountain. Moses meets with God. He gives them his law. And then 11 months they wander through the wilderness before they camp at the border of the promised land that God was promising to them. God's deliverance takes place instantly, in one night, and yet they have 47 days before God meets with them in the mountain, and then 11 months of wandering the land. They get to the edge of the promised land. They are fearful, they're doubtful, and they don't enter in immediately. And then for 40 years, They're wandering this desert. And what we see play out in Israel's history is that God's deliverance happens quickly, but yet it takes a long time for the reality of who he is forming them to be shaped into them as a people and as a nation, that they are his people, that they belong to him, and that they're no longer citizens of Egypt. And so now we move forward to Christ on that cross, and he's dying. He is ministered to them and among them for 3 years, and they're expecting salvation to happen, and yet here he is dying. And they're going to have to wait to see what's going to happen. And he dies on this cross, and the last words he utters is that it is finished. It's finished. And so they're expecting deliverance is going to come. And yet they have to take his body, bury it in a tomb, and nothing happens that day. He's dead. And they wonder, what's going to come of all this? What is going to happen here? When is our deliverance and our salvation going to come? It's been promised. We saw it happen in our history as a nation of Israel. But when is this deliverance that Jesus promised going to happen? Because he's dead. He's in a tomb. The verse and the chapter that we've been dealing with the last few weeks here at CFA is Isaiah chapter 30. It's God speaking to the nation of Israel as they're under assault from one of their enemies. And the enemies are at the doorsteps of their capital, Jerusalem. And they're wondering what to do, and they're looking for help from other nations, and they're sending for help from Egypt. But this is what God speaks to him in Isaiah 30, verse 15. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says: "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." But you would have none of it. You said, "No, we'll flee on horses." Therefore you will flee. You said, "We'll ride off on swift horses." Therefore your pursuers will be swift. 1,000 will flee at the threat of one. At the threat of 5 you will all flee away, till you're left like a flagstaff on a mountaintop, like a banner on a hill. And there's this feeling that they were not living in obedience to what God wanted. He wanted them to turn to him. He wanted them to wait for him. He wanted them to rest in his salvation, to trust in his salvation, to look to him for their salvation. But they were looking anywhere but God. But this is what he says. Even though you go to other places for help, even though you look in these other places, yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. He rises to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. And just as Jesus died on that cross, he is showing us something, the long picture of salvation, that hundreds of years of history are being fulfilled in this moment on this cross. And yes, it's been a wait, and yes, it was a long time getting here, and yes, there's still a little bit of wait that has to happen yet, but things are happening. God is at work. He is doing something. God began the process in the garden, and he's demonstrating it with Israel, that he is doing it, what he promised he would do all throughout their history. It is taking place on that cross, and the words that Jesus uttered, "It is finished," ring true throughout the prophecies, that he has done something, and it is something that is going to stand the test of time and is going to shake the foundations of the earth. And in fact, that is the very thing that happened. We see that when he died on the cross, an earthquake took place, and the ground itself shook because God had done something momentous in that moment. Our repentance, rest, quietness, trust was all hanging in that moment at that cross. And the interesting paradigm as we look back at the Passover, we read this in Exodus 11:6. "There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, but among the Israelites not a dog will bark." This idea that there would be this deep sense of peace, even in the midst of hardship and trial, even in the midst of devastation that was going on around them, as people were mourning and grieving the loss of their firstborn, God was going to give peace to all who were trusting in him and all who were looking at him. And so the question I have for you this Good Friday is, as we contemplate and reflect on the cross, where is your peace? Where is the peace that you have? Is the cross for you a symbol of hope, a symbol of salvation, a symbol of what God is doing and has done in this world? Or is it just another thing that we think about? Because as we reflect on the cross, as we reflect on what Jesus did on that cross, it should lead us to this place, this hope that as we turn to God, as we look to Him, that we can trust Him, that there's something that He is doing, that He is at work. And this Easter, as we reflect, what does the cross mean for you? Because as we look at it the way God would desire us to look at it, it should give us this sense of peace as we wait in expectancy for the salvation that He's going to bring about in your life and in this world.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon His shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held Him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, His death and resurrection. Why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: His wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: His wounds have paid my